Kia ora, I'm Chelsea Daniels, and this is The Front Page, a daily podcast presented by the New Zealand Herald. The debate over asset sales has reared its head again, this time after a very grim result for our national carrier. Air New Zealand has reported an after-tax $40 million loss for the 6 months to December. We've had a controversial and complicated history when it comes to selling off state assets. From bailing out banks to the great 90s airport sell-off, it's always been a touchy subject for Kiwis who want to keep everything in-house. But is it time for us to face facts and maybe privatisation isn't that bad after all? Today on The Front Page, ACT Party leader and Deputy Prime Minister David Seymour is with us to chat about what should stay and what should go. So, David, the airline is blaming global maintenance issues, softer domestic demand and higher aviation costs. Do you think that they have a leg to stand on when it comes to this result?
I guess the question is, where does the bad luck end and the taking responsibility begin? So, yeah, they've had some bad luck, but they've also had bad luck because of choices that were made earlier about acquiring engines and retiring planes and so on. The other point I'd make is that they tell us that they're a flag carrier and people say, it's our national carrier. Well, if it's true that they want to play this role as being a sort of symbol of New Zealand, let's look at what they symbolise. I mean, 20% of their annual report is all about their climate policy. They spend all this time trying to make biofuels and fly electric planes and take the paper cups out of the Koru Lounge because, heaven forbid you have a paper cup while you're, flying through the air with exploding kerosene. You've got to think about the environment, people. It seems to me, and I talk to these guys and a lot of people I like in Air New Zealand and the people in the front line I love because as an MP I have to fly a lot to get around and see people. And, at the same time I've been saying to them for years, all these priorities like, take off, land on time, good price, customer satisfaction, make sure the luggage arrives. I mean, none of this stuff is complicated, or at least maybe it is complicated to do, but it's not complicated to set the goals. They've made it complicated when actually it's very simple.
Well, how do you reckon it reflects? Because at the same time, you've got Qantas across the ditch, Australia's national carrier, reporting a 28% rise in net profit to $1.6 billion. Now, I know that there's a completely different situation. They've obviously got a subsidiary, cheaper airline alternative. It's a bigger population. It's a lot more routes, etc. But it also does have its sustainability goals as well. So, what is New Zealand or Air New Zealand doing so wrong?
Well, I question what Qantas's overall goal is. I mean, I'm sure they're not out there saying our goal is to pollute as much as possible, but I don't know that Qantas has taken on research into creating biofuels or research into electric planes. I mean, they've done a lot of things, and there's other things I know about that I'm not talking about, by the way, just for anyone in New Zealand that thinks I'm being unfair. There's other stuff we could be talking about that we're not.
Can you though? Have you?
No.
So there's stuff that we don't know.
Yeah, so their priorities have been far, far too diffuse. And that's my point. If they're a symbol of New Zealand, then we got to ask ourselves as a country, we want to be rich. We don't want to find ourselves much poorer than Poland and Hungary and Slovakia, Czech Republic, countries we used to kind of look down on and take, babies from, as adoptees. I mean, orphans. We used to look down on these countries. They're overtaking us economically. They've done that in the last 30 years. We used to compare ourselves with Canada, Australia. We think we're like Japan, America, UK. We're now significantly poorer than them. And we got to start making good choices. And Air New Zealand seems to symbolise making a whole lot of choices to pursue a whole lot of other goals while our actual performance falls behind.
And can you not reveal what you know because they're market sensitive?
Because I think that they have a right to a bit of privacy, but we'll see. Some of these things will come out in time.
Well, you pinky swore someone at New Zealand. You can't say anything.
Yeah, well, let's just say I suspect some of their staff over time will talk more.
Do you think the airline is actually serving the New Zealand taxpayer? Because I had a quick look this morning to just to see how much flights are, right? And something like Auckland to Christchurch, if you want a flexi fare and luggage, if you're going, say, for a wedding or a birthday or something like that for a long weekend, that's getting up to about $450, $500 one way. And that's Auckland to Christchurch.
Yeah, it seems like a pretty wild price, right? And there's a competitor and a lot of people are choosing that. But, I mean, let's just unpack this for a second. There is a cost. I know people say it's our national carrier, it must remain in New Zealand hands. And people can have that, but I just want to tell you what the cost is. Apparently it's worth about $2 billion in its market cap. That means that if we sold what we own, 50%, we get about $1 billion. At the moment, the government pays 4% on its debt. So we could have $1 billion less debt, and at the moment, 4% of $1 billion is $40 million a year. So as taxpayers, we are paying $40 million a year in order to cover the interest on the debt that we're holding in order to own this thing. That's simple. What's more, it just lost $60 million in half a year, so make that $100 million cost to own the thing. Admittedly, other times it makes money and that's nice, but on balance, after the bailouts, we're actually hosing money into this thing, so it's a cost to own it. Then you say, okay, well, what are we getting for that? Well, there's three basic arguments, I think. One is an economical connections. I think a lot of people would say we're not getting that. Two is serving regions that wouldn't otherwise be served. Well, actually, you know what? Origin Air, Air Chatham's, Sounds Air. I mean, there's all these plucky upstart airlines that are doing more for the really underserved regions than Air New Zealand is, so they can't claim to be doing that anymore. And then the other part of it is, well, a sense of pride, and it gives us some fulfillment. And I just ask, well, what exactly are we proud of given all these performance issues?
Right, has that kind of stuff tripped you up? Worrying about an electric plane, you've been trialling it, you don't even know how to deploy it in your fleet. Mm-hmm. Worrying about sustainable aviation fuel all the time, which is miles more expensive than what you're paying for general fuel. Is all of this stuff tripping you guys up when you should just be focusing on flying the existing planes?
No, it's not distracting us. I know from the outside it might look like it might be distracting us. I can assure you, as the CEO of the company, it is far from distracting us. I think the point you make around getting back to the fundamentals of the business is a very important point. As far as our customer experience is concerned, knowing the key customer segments that we serve and making sure that our offering is aligned to them is very important.
Do you think that we scrutinise these private companies that we have shares in enough?
Well, I mean, one of the good things about them being private companies is that there's also a private investor that's on the other side of the bargain. And if you look at Air New Zealand's share price, I mean, that's been falling. So it seems that, a lot of people in the private sector don't want to own it, and it's been coming down over the last couple of years. I think we need to start asking ourselves, we own something. That's a choice. What's the costs? What's the benefits? Because if we don't start being a little bit more honest with each other, then we get all these distractions, all this wokeism and identity politics, but the numbers don't lie. We are slowly becoming a poorer country relative to the ones we like to compare ourselves with, and the countries we can compare with ourselves with are the ones that we used to look down on as being poor and take orphans from. So that's the choice, guys. We've got to take the emotion out, scrutinise a bit harder, and start being a bit more analytical about what choices we make.
Do you think that if we sold our stake in Air New Zealand, though, there would have to be some kind of clause saying that, look, there will be no bailout in future, there will be no buyback? Because in my mind, if they would still operate as if that there is a safety net below them.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Well, you go back to, the worst possible scenario. I saw Heather Duplessis-Allen, who I agree with most of the time, saying, I'm wrong about this because we needed the airline in COVID. Well, the truth is that if we had not had public ownership of Air New Zealand during COVID, you had a country that was spending, all that money, huge billions of dollars of debt, most of which went into Air New Zealand. Are you really saying that the New Zealand government, for the money that it put into bailing out Air New Zealand, could not have persuaded anyone to fly an aeroplane to New Zealand for 2 years? I mean, come on. It's an interesting argument. It's an emotive argument, but it doesn't stack up once you get into it.
But I guess what I'm saying is that How do we guarantee that the business will become more risk averse?
Well, I mean, I think first of all, we can't. We can do all sorts of things as a government owner, but that hasn't worked. We can appoint people, but then, of course, you say, well, the other guys win the election, which they will do at some point in the next decade. I hope as a Democrat that there will be changes of government, just not too soon. Then other people get put on the board. So it's an inherently political beast, and it's reflecting political choices. That's the problem with it. That's why I don't believe that governments should own commercial enterprises, because you can't pursue political goals and commercial goals. Air New Zealand is a perfect example of trying to do that and failing.
If we were to seriously consider asset sales, do you think that there should be some kind of cross-party collaboration on how that profit will actually be used? Because I suppose you can't sell your house to pay off your credit card debt, because then you have nowhere to live. So it's like, what should we actually be using this money for?
Well, I think it would be useful to have more cross-party agreement on infrastructure. So you've seen that in the last week. This cross-party accord, I think, is a really useful thing to say, right, it takes 10 years to build something out of concrete. I think that's too long, but it takes at least 10 years. We have 3 elections in that cycle. So if you look at what's happened lately, we had a whole lot of roads getting built. Labor and New Zealand First government came in 2017, cancelled all of that, said they were going to build a bike bridge and a light rail, didn't build a bike bridge or a light rail, which is probably a good thing, but meanwhile didn't build any roads either. Now we're restarting that. And what's happened, a decade's gone by, nothing got built. So getting long-term alignment on infrastructure, absolutely critical, and it's happening. Maybe the next thing you do is say, right, well, we're going to look at all the assets we own and say, are there things that are losing money, not doing a public service, and actually if we put more money into infrastructure, the economy could grow and we'd all be wealthier. So I would actually talk more about recycling. We're not going to say that we're necessarily going to end up owning less stuff, but it's going to be stuff that assists the economy to grow rather than competing with the rest of the economy.
Or even just finding something, and it's funny that you say infrastructure, because it's the first thing that came to my mind as well, perhaps using the money to bring our woefully deteriorating infrastructure all around the country up to standard. I think that should be something that every party should agree with, right?
Yeah, and the problem is that no politician has had their photo taken with underground infrastructure. Now, some people say some of us probably should, but there aren't the photo ops for fixing leaky pipes under the ground. That's why they end up creating catastrophes, and then suddenly it gets political attention when it's too late. We need to have more cross-party consensus that there are some things that will benefit over a couple of generations. Those things need to be done and paid for over a couple of generations. It's all part of New Zealand, I think, becoming a more mature country.
Yeah, because whenever I see the issue of asset sales come up, people say, well, we shouldn't be selling our debt, using it to deal with our debt as a nation. So something like that would make sense. But I saw that the New Zealand election study that tracks Kiwi attitudes about a range of topics, close to half of the public agree that privatisation of state-owned enterprises has gone too far. I would argue that half isn't too bad. Right?
Well, I mean, my job is to make the case, and I'm grateful for you giving me the opportunity to say, okay, it's costing you $40 million in interest payments on the debt we hold to own Air New Zealand. Do you think it's worth $40 million plus whatever they're just about to lose? What are you getting for that? And could you get more for $1 billion, $40 million a year on the interest? Could you get more from owning, I don't know, another tunnel under the harbour bridge? That might give more growth potential to New Zealand than we have currently.
What do you think the voter hates more, though, asset sales or the possibility of higher taxes?
Well, that is a choice, because the other way you look at it, you're paying tax to pay the interest on owning Air New Zealand. And so that is a choice, right? But I mean, I would just say, look, I hear what people say, and I'm listening to what people are saying, but I'm also, I hope, bringing something useful to the table, which is, guys, we are in a state of long-term decline as a country. People are leaving in huge numbers. We need to change course. We can't just keep doing what we're currently doing. And, I'm up for having the debate about it. I ask how many of my colleagues are.
Do you think that the Air New Zealand issue is such a big one because it is seen as a strategic asset?
Well, people use these words, but I don't know what they mean, but if it's a strategic asset, what's the strategy? No one ever seems to know. We need to get away from the rhetoric and say, well, practically, what would happen if there was some real disaster? And the truth is that for the money we had to put into bailing out Air New Zealand, we could have paid to maintain air services into New Zealand during the crisis. I mean, you just remember the Mowbrays managed to charter a jet and bring more essential equipment into New Zealand in the early days of COVID than perhaps Air New Zealand did, considering the amount of money that went in. So, there's always other alternatives. And so people say it's a strategic asset. I just say, what strategy?
Thanks for joining us, David.
Thanks, Chelsea. Pleasure.
That's it for this episode of The Front Page. You can read more about today's stories and extensive news coverage at nzherald.co.nz. The Front Page is hosted and produced by me, Chelsea Daniels. Kane Dickey is our studio operator, Richard Martin, our producer and editor, and our executive producer is Jane Yee. Follow The Front Page on the iHeart app or wherever you get your podcasts, and join us next time for another look beyond the headlines.